This is a free course, no fluff, no motivational cliches. What you're about to watch is a direct and serious exploration of Carl Gustav Jung's teachings in psychology, with one clear purpose: to help you understand your shadow and develop emotional resilience that does not collapse under pressure. Who is this for? If you're dealing with anxiety, depression, guilt, anger, grief, or an ongoing sense of inner conflict, feel stuck, repeating the same self-destructive patterns despite knowing better, this is for you. If you've tried to control your emotions and failed, if you carry an internal weight you can't quite explain, but feel every day you are exactly where you need to be. Throughout this course, you'll gain a clear and practical understanding of what Jung called the shadow. You'll see how it silently shapes your thoughts, emotions, and impulses, often without your awareness. You'll begin to understand why emotional outbursts, anxiety attacks, chronic guilt, or unexplained sadness don't come primarily from external events, but from unresolved conflicts inside the psyche. More importantly, you'll learn how to face this material not through shallow positivity or surface-level self-help, but through a method grounded in over a century of depth psychology. This is not passive content. Pause when needed, take notes, rewatch sections. Every concept here has the potential to change how you relate to yourself and to life, but only if you apply it. This work is personal. It requires honesty. And yes, it requires discomfort. But on the other side of that discomfort is the emotional freedom most people spend their entire lives chasing. You'll learn why repressing the shadow lies at the root of many psychological disturbances, how the persona, the social mask you wear, contributes to emotional fragility, and how archetypes from the collective unconscious quietly influence your daily behavior. This is a complete foundation for anyone beginning or deepening the process Jung called individuation, the lifelong task of becoming who you truly are. If you want to move through difficult emotions without being consumed by them, you're in the right place. But understand this clearly: real change only comes to those who stay with the work. Let's begin. The shadow. This is the term Jung used to describe everything within you that you reject, suppress, or refuse to acknowledge as part of yourself. And this is where the real work starts, because until you understand the shadow, it will continue to influence your emotional life in ways that feel overwhelming and uncontrollable. From early childhood, you were taught by parents, teachers, and society what was acceptable and what wasn't. You were rewarded for being polite, obedient, agreeable. You were corrected or punished for anger, envy, sadness, selfishness, or vulnerability. Like every child, you adapted. Certain emotions were pushed aside. Certain impulses were hidden, not because they disappeared, but because they became unsafe to express. This is how the shadow forms. But what happens to what is repressed? It doesn't vanish. It remains active in the unconscious, shaping reactions, thoughts, and emotional responses from behind the scenes. The shadow is the sum of these denied aspects, the parts of you you'd rather not see, yet that continue to act through you. Anxiety is often a shadow expression. Depression frequently reflects emotions that were never processed. Explosive anger is the voice of something that has been ignored for too long. Self-sabotage is often the shadow turning against the ego's conscious goals. The shadow is not inherently evil. Within it are qualities that could become sources of strength, creativity, and vitality if they are integrated consciously. But when ignored, the shadow operates autonomously. This is why so many people remain trapped in emotional cycles they can't explain, repeating patterns that feel inevitable. Here is the difficult truth: you are not only the version of yourself you present to the world, you are also what you fear admitting. And the more you run from that truth, the more emotionally fragile you become. Jung understood this deeply. He observed that whatever the conscious mind refuses to acknowledge does not vanish, it descends into the unconscious, where it begins to act independently. From there, it shapes your reactions, your choices, and your emotional states, often without your awareness. This is how the shadow operates, quietly, persistently, and with remarkable influence. When you believe you are calm but suddenly explode. When sadness overtakes you without a clear cause. When anxiety grips you despite having everything together, the shadow is speaking. Not to punish you, but to be seen. The shadow is not evil by nature. It contains rage, yes, but also vitality. It holds envy, but also ambition. It carries fear, but also instinctual wisdom. The tragedy is not that these elements exist. The tragedy is that they remain unconscious. Because what is unconscious cannot be negotiated with. It can only overpower. This is why Jung insisted that psychological growth does not come from eliminating darkness, but from illuminating it. Integration is not about becoming flawless. It is about becoming whole. A person who integrates the shadow does not stop feeling anger. They stop being possessed by it. They do not erase fear. They learn what it is trying to protect. They do not deny selfish impulses. They understand their origin and limits. And through this understanding, emotional strength is born. Real emotional resilience is not emotional numbness. It is the capacity to experience powerful emotions without being ruled by them. This is the foundation of what Jung called individuation, the lifelong process of becoming who you truly are, beyond masks, roles, and borrowed identities. But before this process can move forward, there is a major obstacle that must be understood. This is the foundation of what Jung called individuation, the lifelong process of becoming who you truly are, beyond masks, roles, and borrowed identities. But before this process can move forward, there is a major obstacle that must be understood. The persona, which is the social mask you have built to survive, to be accepted, to belong. In the next section, you will see how the persona strengthens the shadow, why the most put together people often suffer the most internally, and how dismantling the mask is the first real act of psychological freedom. What comes next may challenge how you see yourself, but it is unavoidable for anyone who seeks genuine emotional mastery. Now let's continue. To understand why the shadow holds such power over your emotional life, you must first understand the persona. Jung used this term to describe the social mask you wear, the version of yourself you present to the world. In order to be accepted, approved of, or admired, the persona is not inherently false. It serves a purpose. It helps you adapt. It allows you to function in society. It protects you from rejection. But problems begin when you confuse the persona with who you truly are. From early childhood, you learn which traits are rewarded and which are punished. You are praised for being agreeable, polite, compliant. You are corrected or rejected for expressing anger, jealousy, sadness, or defiance. Slowly, almost unconsciously, you begin to curate yourself. Certain traits are amplified, others are suppressed. Over time, this adaptation hardens into an identity. You no longer say, "This is how I act." You begin to believe, "This is who I am." This is where the danger lies. Everything that does not fit the persona is pushed into the unconscious. Anger that contradicts your niceness. Ambition that conflicts with your humility. Vulnerability that threatens your image of strength. All of it is rejected, and all of it becomes shadow. The more rigid and idealized the persona becomes, the darker and more autonomous the shadow grows. This is why people who appear the most controlled, the most positive, the most morally certain, often struggle intensely in private. Anxiety, depression, sudden rage, a sense of emptiness that no achievement seems to fill. These are not signs of weakness, they are signs of imbalance. In Modern Man in Search of a Soul, Jung warned that the persona is a compromise with society, but also a self-deception that distances us from our authentic nature. When you over-identify with the mask, you abandon large parts of yourself. And what is abandoned does not remain passive. It returns through symptoms, through emotional breakdowns, through impulsive behavior that doesn't feel like you. The psyche demands wholeness. When denied, it enforces it. This creates a constant inattention, a quiet exhaustion. You spend enormous energy maintaining an image, while simultaneously battling what that image excludes. It is an unwinnable conflict. The shadow will always find a way to assert itself, as long as the persona remains absolute. This does not mean you must destroy the persona. It means you must loosen your identification with it. You are not the mask, you are the totality behind it. True emotional freedom begins when you allow yourself to be complex, contradictory, and human. Only then does the shadow lose its grip, because what is acknowledged no longer needs to rebel. In the next section, you will learn how to recognize the shadow as it appears in your everyday life, through emotional reactions, projections, and behavioral patterns. This is where theory becomes personal, and where the real work begins. Now that you understand how the persona strengthens the shadow, the next step is learning how to recognize the shadow as it operates in your everyday life. Jung was clear about this. The shadow does not hide in abstract ideas. It reveals itself through emotional reactions. In Aion, he writes that the shadow appears in impulsive behavior, in exaggerated emotions, and most clearly, in projections onto others. This means you do not need special insight or mystical experiences to find your shadow. You need honesty and attention. Pay close attention to moments when your emotional reaction feels disproportionate. A small comment triggers intense anger. A minor rejection causes deep shame. Someone else's success fills you with bitterness. These reactions are not random. They are signals. They point directly to unconscious material that has not been integrated. One of the clearest mechanisms of the shadow is projection. Projection occurs when you attribute to others qualities you refuse to recognize in yourself. For example, you may feel irrational hatred towards someone you label as arrogant, yet beneath that reaction may lie your own repressed desire for confidence, power, or recognition. What you despise in them is what you have forbidden in yourself. Another common form of projection appears through moral judgment. You harshly criticize people for being emotional, weak, or needy. But often this contempt masks your own suppressed vulnerability. You learned long ago that showing sensitivity was unsafe, so you buried it. And now it returns through judgment. Envy is another major indicator of shadow activity. When you feel persistent envy towards someone's success, it often reveals unlived potential within you. A desire you denied, a path you were afraid to take. Rather than acknowledging this pain, the ego disguises it as resentment. The shadow also manifests through behavior. Chronic procrastination, self-sabotage, repeatedly choosing relationships that recreate the same suffering. These patterns are not failures of willpower, they are unconscious strategies. Parts of you are working against your conscious goals because they have never been heard. Jung emphasized that the psyche seeks balance. When certain aspects are excluded from consciousness, they act autonomously. This is why people often say, "I don't know why I keep doing this." The shadow knows why. Dreams offer another direct doorway. In Man and His Symbols, Jung explained that dreams express what consciousness refuses to see: being chased, losing control, encounters with dark figures or aggressive animals. These images often represent shadow aspects, seeking recognition. Even the body participates in this dialogue. Chronic tension, unexplained fatigue, persistent physical symptoms without clear medical cause. These can reflect psychic energy, spent repressing unconscious material. The shadow always finds a way to speak, if not through thoughts, then through emotions. If not through emotions, then through the body. The task, then, is not to suppress these signals, but to interpret them. Ask yourself regularly, what emotional reactions dominate me against my will? What behaviors repeat despite my intentions? What traits in others disturb me the most? These questions are not comfortable, but they are precise. They guide you directly to the shadow. However, recognizing the shadow is only the beginning. Awareness alone does not dissolve it. The next and most difficult step is confrontation. And in the next section, you will learn what it truly means to confront the shadow consciously without being overwhelmed or consumed by it. This is where real transformation begins. Now that you can recognize the shadow in daily life, we arrive at the most difficult stage of this work, confrontation. Carl Jung was unequivocal about this point. There is no individuation without confronting the shadow. In the Undiscovered Self, he states that personal development does not occur by eliminating darkness, but by facing it consciously. To confront the shadow does not mean to act it out. It does not mean indulging impulses or justifying destructive behavior. It means something far more demanding. It means allowing into awareness those aspects of yourself you have spent your life avoiding. This is where most people turn back, because confrontation produces discomfort, shame, guilt, fear. When repressed material rises into consciousness, it challenges the image you hold of yourself. You are forced to see that you are not as morally pure, as emotionally controlled, or as selfless as your persona suggests. The ego resists this realization. Its first reaction is denial. You rationalize, you minimize, you explain away what you feel. I'm not angry. I don't care. That's not really me. These are defenses. If denial fails, resistance appears. You feel guilt for having unacceptable thoughts, shame for emotions you were taught were wrong, fear of what accepting them might mean. Many people stop here. They retreat back into the persona, strengthening the mask and pushing the shadow deeper underground. But those who continue enter the phase of acceptance. Acceptance does not mean approval. It means acknowledgement. You say to yourself, this emotion exists in me, not as a failure, not as a flaw, but as a psychological fact. For example, you recognize envy within yourself. Instead of suppressing it, you examine it. Where does it come from? What desire lies beneath it? What part of my life feels unlived? Or you confront anger that has been buried for years. You realize it is connected to violated boundaries, to resentment that was never expressed. You allow yourself to feel it consciously, without acting it out destructively. This is crucial. Conscious experience transforms emotion. Unconscious emotion controls behavior. As confrontation continues, the final phase begins, integration. Integration means that previously split-off aspects of the psyche are assimilated into consciousness. They no longer operate autonomously. The shadow loses its compulsive power because it no longer needs to fight for recognition. Jung emphasized that this process is not linear. In Aion, he describes shadow work as a lifelong dialogue between consciousness and the unconscious. There is no final victory, no permanent enlightenment. There is only increasing awareness, and with that awareness, greater emotional stability. However, as you confront the shadow, something else begins to happen. Deeper structures of the psyche emerge. Archetypal forces from the collective unconscious begin to influence the process. These forces can guide you or deceive you. Understanding them is essential, and in the next section you will learn how archetypes, such as the anima, animus, self, and trickster, appear during shadow integration and shape the path of individuation. As shadow integration deepens, you begin to encounter forces that do not feel purely personal. These are not habits learned in childhood or traits shaped by culture alone. They belong to what Jung called the collective unconscious, a deeper psychic layer shared across humanity, containing primordial patterns of experience. Jung referred to these patterns as archetypes. They are not inherited ideas, but inherited forms, structures that shape how experience appears. During shadow work, these archetypes begin to surface because the psyche is reorganizing itself. The first archetype many encounter is the anima or animus. The anima represents the unconscious feminine within a man's psyche. The animus represents the unconscious masculine within a woman's psyche. They often appear in dreams, fantasies, or projections onto others. When unconscious, they distort perception. You may idealize, demonize, or become emotionally dependent on someone who carries this projection. But when consciously integrated, the anima or animus becomes a guide, a mediator between ego and unconscious. It brings emotional depth, intuition, and symbolic understanding. As this integration progresses, another archetype emerges, the trickster. The trickster disrupts certainty. It undermines rigid beliefs, exposes hypocrisy, and reveals self-deception. This archetype often appears during moments of psychological inflation. When the ego begins to believe it has mastered the unconscious, the trickster humbles. It creates confusion, paradox, and irony. To prevent false enlightenment, many spiritual crises are actually trickster encounters, moments when meaning collapses, certainty dissolves, and previous identities fail. If misunderstood, this phase can lead to despair. If endured consciously, it prepares the psyche for a deeper integration. At the center of this entire process stands the most important archetype of all, the self. The self is not the ego. It is the organizing principle of the whole psyche. Conscious and unconscious united, Jung described individuation as the ego's gradual alignment with the self, not domination, not surrender, but relationship. When the ego resists the self, life feels fragmented. When the ego identifies with the self, inflation occurs, the illusion of godhood. Balance is essential. True individuation produces neither arrogance nor submission, but grounded wholeness, a person who can hold paradox, who can recognize darkness without being consumed by it, who can live meaning without clinging to certainty. But this raises the final question. If wholeness includes darkness, suffering, and contradiction, what does this mean for morality, spirituality, and belief itself? Jung believed the final stage of individuation forces a confrontation, not just with the shadow, but with the nature of meaning, God, and the limits of human understanding. And that is where this journey concludes. At the end of individuation, there is no final comfort, no permanent certainty, no belief system that can fully contain what the psyche has discovered. This is where Jung diverged from both traditional religion and modern materialism. He did not ask, "Do you believe in God?" He asked something far more dangerous. What psychological reality does God represent? For Jung, God was not merely a doctrine, nor a superstition to be discarded. God was an archetypal fact, an image arising spontaneously in the human psyche, across cultures and history. To deny this image entirely was to deny a fundamental structure of the mind itself, but to identify with it literally was equally destructive. This tension forms the final trial. The psyche must learn to live with mystery, without collapsing into belief or nihilism. Jung observed that modern people do not suffer because life lacks pleasure. They suffer because life lacks meaning, and meaning cannot be manufactured. It emerges from responsibility, from conscious suffering, and from dialogue with the unconscious. The individuated person does not claim moral purity. They recognize their capacity for evil and choose responsibility anyway. They do not seek salvation through ideology, spirituality, or identity. They seek wholeness. This is why individuation is rare. It offers no tribe, no slogans, no guarantees. Only the burden of becoming who you actually are. Jung believed the future of humanity depended on individuals who could endure this burden. People capable of holding opposites. People who integrate their shadows instead of projecting them onto enemies. People who understand that the most dangerous darkness is the one we refuse to see. In this sense, individuation is not self-improvement. It is a moral act, a refusal to let unconscious forces rule the world through you. And perhaps that is what Jung meant when he said he did not believe in God, but knew that God was a reality the psyche could not escape. Not above us, not outside us, but encountered in the depths we are brave enough to face. That is the cost of consciousness, and that is the price of becoming whole. If you made it this far, we thank you and hope you are one step closer to understanding your psyche. And for more content like this, like, comment and subscribe.